Don't beat your chest with drumming vibrato, telling me of your manly prowess. It frightens the children. You see, they know nothing of war, and I don't want them taught. Let them live in a world without battle death. When we old roosters die off, they can be free of the old lies that you and I were taught. Don't rattle your sabers with heightened emotion, telling the world of the glory of peace through might. It makes the mothers cry. You see, they know too much of war, and I want them to forget. Let them live in a world where their children do come home. When we old sword rattlers die off, they can smile their deepest smile while watching their babies grow up. Don't point your guns and missiles of thunder threatening the life of your neighbor. It saddens the peacemaker. You see, they've grown through the pain of too much killing. Let them realize, finally, their dream of peace for all people. When we old warriors have all gone away, maybe the meek can inherit the earth. Good morning. As you have gathered, my topic is about war. For those of you who didn't get that, my topic is about war. I would like to offer, as a convincing argument against war, simply that war is the most unreasonable activity that human beings can engage in. However, George Santayana, the philosopher, pointed out, and I quote, "There is nothing so helpless as reason when faced with unreason." War is unreasonable, but it is far more than that. It is madness at its extreme. War represents the quintessential failure in human beings. When human beings decide to go to war, the perception of reality is maximally distorted, and reason is abandoned and replaced with magical delusions. We march excitedly off to fill with dreams of heroics and glory, only to find that carnage awaits our arrival. Delusions of grandeur are stripped away, and in its place we are confronted with the bloody truth. We have once again been manipulated by those charged with our protection. How many times in a single lifetime can the average person declare, "We are at war again"? We can be sure it's far too many. It seems that there are always some thugs who want more power or territory or wealth, or perhaps they're just emotionally disfigured. On the other hand, it might be some xenophobic person who just wants to cleanse the territory of the underpeople. It may also be someone who will resort to extreme violence just to satisfy an inadequate ego. But war is a fact of life. And to be sure, all wars have religious overtones. Zealots who are certain that their view of God is superior to anybody else who thinks differently. For example, recently we have seen the short-sighted thinking of people who want to impose a 200-year-old culture over people with a 2,000-year-old culture. And to be sure, Christians think they are superior to Muslims, and Muslims know that Christians are the infidels. But regardless of how war comes to be, sooner or later we will all declare we're at war again. You would think that we could learn not to murder each other, but it seems that the only thing that war reminds us of is that we are truly the foolish species. It's a perfect example of the old saying that we don't learn anything from history except we don't learn from history. Herodotus in the 5th century before the current era was one of the first philosophers to attempt to understand war. And since that time, there have been thousands of thinkers who try to understand this, but in the end, we are all left with just a bunch of theories. There are no good words for the makers of war. We call them thugs and hawks and warmongers, but these terms are all much too mild for the havoc they wreak. It is as though there is an invisible substance that falls over us and clouds the mind of the politicians who declare war on other human beings, and then that cloud seeps out and covers the rest of us. So we send our sons and our daughters off to the slaughter. We could call it temporary insanity, but the problem is it's not temporary. There's no recovery. The people are still dead, cities are still destroyed, and children are still orphaned. Mark Twain described human beings as the lowest animal in Letters from the Earth. And to be sure, he makes a pretty strong case. Maybe we just can't help it. Maybe we're just stuck at a very low evolutionary level. It's like our brains aren't big enough for the ideas and the jobs we have to do. It's like we come up with these number 10 ideas, but we only have a number 6 size brain. Whatever the reason, though, we will continue to say, we are at war again. And with all of our high-powered nuclear weapons today, if we all get blown to hell, there won't be anybody left to say, oops. You see, war is not a do-over. Look at human history, the Crimean War, the Crusades, the Civil War, World Wars I and II, Korea, Vietnam, and now Iraq. They're not do-overs. Why weren't the designers of all of this chaos put in prison? Never have the soldiers marching off to war taken up arms against the people who make the wars. Never have we given a war where nobody showed up. Instead, the war makers continue to send our children off to kill children in other places, and other countries send their children off to kill our children. And always, God is on somebody's side, if not everybody's side. And the human spirit just sinks lower and lower and lower. It seems that our brains are just too weak and our nervous systems are just too excitable. Old men spout off the rhetoric of bravery, honor, and glory, and young men just want to hurt somebody. And before you know it, young girls are crying and mothers are mourning. We spend billions and billions of dollars destroying a country, and then we turn around and spend billions and billions and billions of dollars rebuilding it. We're masters of folly. And the clowns that started all this and promote war get richer and richer and richer. We perpetuate the idea of a mythical struggle against mythical evil. Our professional soldiers lead our young men off to don their armor and pretend to be mythical warriors. The cause is always in the service of sovereignty and freedom, and death in the face of evil, that's mythical heroics. And that's not to say that there isn't some real heroics in actual battle. But that's not the heroics of songs and poems and banners waving. Battlefield heroics has more to do with recognizing our commonality of other human beings. It has little to do with political ideology. Look at the human nervous system for a moment. One of its most important features is fight or flight. When we feel the slightest threat, we either want to fight or we want to run. We are reflex bound. Our first response is always primitive. So our nervous system is constantly choosing to be the victim or the predator. When countries get big enough and armed enough, they choose to be predator every time. Poorer countries, smaller countries are usually the victims. And their unarmed citizens are always written off as casualties of war. Truth of the matter is, everyone is a casualty of war. Win, lose, or draw. Even if you could discount the death and destruction of war, we're all left with guilt. We all feel guilty over wars. Some because they didn't go. Others because they did go. Some because of what they did. And others because of what they didn't do. And then there are those who feel guilty simply because they could not stop the insanity in the first place. We all end up scarred by war. Early in our history, our predators were lions and bears and snakes and other animals. Now our predators are other human beings. We fight over money, power, control, natural resources, bragging rights, land boundaries. We fight over the slightest provocation, and if there is no provocation, someone will make one up. Simply put, we fight because of egos and ideology. I think every country should have an anti-war minister. This would be a person who makes the rest of us prove beyond the shadow of doubt that war is the only option for our very survival. We might then have time to calm our at-the-ready reflexes. You know, part of the role of civilization is to condition human beings to inhibit primitive responses. We have laws and rules against murder, violence, fighting, and other violent attacks. But this doesn't seem to apply when it comes to war. We make it honorable to participate in war, in organized murder. Too many proud daddies encourage their sons to be men and whip up on the neighbor's kids. We still have this archaic notion that a man fighting is a manly thing to do. So naturally, war takes on this magical quality of manliness and honor. After all, it's what we were originally designed to do. But you know, like so many other things that have gone by the board, it is rarely necessary for fisticuff, and it is even far less necessary for organized mass murder. If you condition the public to believe that this is for God and the country, then we readily send off our children. And if it proves to be folly, the most amazing thing about it is we still defend it. And we say we've got to keep killing so that the first people who were killed don't die in vain. Sadly, our young men and women do die in vain because of lies and egos and ideology. When more often than not, it's time to wake up and admit we have been duped. Wars are pretty easy to construct. All you have to do is invent a bad man or a sinner. Rollo May phrased it this way, quote, "At the outset of every war, we hastily transform our enemies into the image of the demonic." Close quote. We declare our enemies evil, and that gives us what is known as a superordinate goal. This is the goal that goes over everything, and it's so big, it makes all other goals insignificant. So we put aside our petty differences. And then we go off to slay the dragon. But what we forget is that the dragon lives within each of us. And as we slay the dragon, we slay ourselves. Not necessarily in one fell swoop, but slowly and imperceptibly. We reduce the human spirit each time we let the dragon out. There are more than a dozen scientific reasons for war. But it really all boils down to this. Number one, we remain very vulnerable to manipulation. Secondly, we are still very primitive emotionally. And thirdly, we frequently let the idiots and the psychopaths come to power. And we have to remember that insane leadership does not imply that the leaders are stupid, because obviously they know how to manipulate us. And we're obviously very easy to manipulate. They play us like fiddles while they follow ancient scripts written in the pages of antiquity. They fiercely defend the necessity for war while we nod our heads and march off in group approval. I think there is still that archaic drive for conquering heroes to be adorned with capes and garlands as they ride through the streets of praise and adoration. But for the rest of us, we settle for dirt in the battlefields, sweat, tears, and blood for our garlands. And our homecoming offers no parade. It has always amazed me how some philosophers can see it so differently. The Roman poet Juvenal said, quote, "Now we suffer the evils of a long peace." The great philosopher Hegel put it this way: war has the higher meaning that through it the ethical help of a nation is maintained. The ethical help is maintained through war? Sir Arthur Keith, the noted physical anthropologist, had this to say, and I quote, "Nature keeps her orchard healthy by pruning, and war is her pruning hook." I think we're pruning the wrong limbs. Even one of the people that I admire the most, Thomas Jefferson, said that the fallen are just fodder for the earth. I personally think that no leader should ever even think about declaring war unless they intend to stand front on in the first line. War never fulfills its promise. It promises glory and it delivers carnage. It promises peace, but it only leads to more war. It promises superiority, but it only reduces both sides or all sides to the same low level. It promises freedom, but it only delivers the necessity for constant vigilance. It promises prosperity, but it only leaves debt for our grandchildren and our great-grandchildren. So why do we do it? We do it because someone told us that we had an enemy, and if we didn't fight them, they'll hurt us. We do it because we believe the lie that we are better than they are. We do it because we think we are right and they are wrong. And we do it for our particular Almighty God. Some of us do it because we're so young and so impressionable, we don't know better. And maybe we do it because we've always done it. Well, I've been skirting around one of the most important issues, and that is that there are two kinds of war. There's the mythical war, and there's the real war. The mythical war is the war of fable and folklore, war stories and songs, mythical heroes. We could call this the King Arthur Wars. King Arthur and his noble knights fought against evil and the wrongdoers. They rescued maidens and restored right to noble purposes. We all serve this noble idea, to dream that impossible dream, to fight the unbeatable foe, to strive with our last ounce of courage, and to win in the name of truth and justice and nobility. It is very easy to arouse this dream. All we have to do is be told that there is evil afoot, and we must defend against it. So we march off unswerving with banners undulating in the wind, and we are buoyed by dreams of glory. This notion gets reinforced again and again and again in books and films. Here we are, once again. We are all marching out of Middle Earth to slay the orcs. Well, it just isn't that way. War is not mythical. War is real. The dead really are dead. The legs really do get cut off. Brains really do suffer traumatic injury. And people really do come home in body bags. All because we fail to resolve a difference of opinion. All because we perceive somebody evil. All because of somebody's ideology. All because we are God-fearing people. For 1 nanosecond, could any real spiritual person believe that a worthy God could really want us to fight and kill and conquer and capture anyone else? Humanity will never achieve a deep spirituality with the idea of war lurking in the backs of our brains. We are pawns. We need to learn that all wars have hidden agendas for those who declare them. We are told that we must respond with fierce military might to protect ourselves. And the last thing to happen is that anyone who voices opinion to the idea of war is a traitor. This triple strand thinking is a cocktail for organized mass. Now, I am not a pacifist. I was a Marine. And I think that war is not always unavoidable. Sometimes it's just necessary to defend yourself. If the Genghis Khans or the Hitlers or the Mussolinis of the world had come to power, humanity certainly would have suffered immeasurably. Reality dictates that the world community must stand up to the thugs. But thugship should be determined by the entire world community and not by a single individual or one small group. What happens generally, however, can be summed up in this quote by Bertrand Russell, quote, "Our world has sprouted a weird concept of security and a warped sense of morality. Weapons are sheltered like treasures, and children are exposed to incineration." For me, one of the most extraordinary things about war is the fact that even the mildest-mannered, most peace-loving people can be whipped into the idea that another country or other people or other religions are evil and must be destroyed. It is more true than often that all the combatants think that God is on their side and that they are fighting this mythical battle to save the entire world. We fight fire with fire on both sides, willing to let hell rain down on the enemy because they're not as good as we are. The transformation begins at that point, the minute we see them as bad. It's a complete cognitive realignment of our values, and it places dreams of mythical heroics in front of reason, which gets abandoned. The nicest people on the planet can be consumed with the idea of evil or the ungodly. And at that point, torture and starvation and destruction and murder becomes a reasonable thing to do if it'll save me. Let me give you just one little example. The late Jerry Falwell was one of the extreme leaders of the Christian right, and he made it very clear that we always have to draw lines, battle lines. He said the following: the war is not between fundamentalists and liberals, but it is between those who love Jesus and those who hate him. When war is on the horizon, they're only black and white. And we, whoever we happens to be, is always the good guy. Anyone who questions the black and white posture is, at the very least, aiding the enemy, and at the worst, a traitor. Abraham Lincoln assessed the Civil War, and for that matter, all other wars, when he accurately said, both sides claim to be acting according to the will of God. Close quote. It is delusions that kill our youth, so that they bleed their lives out in the dirt of unremembered battlefields. We're not King Arthurs or little Achilles. We're flesh and blood. And our battles are invented by ideologues and the insane. So we march off to war again and again and again and again. I suppose it's so politicians can have something to write about in their memoirs. War profiteers get richer and ideologues further their agenda. And above all, God is served. More often than not, those who march off to fight their mythical heroic wars come home with the filthy taste of real war in their mouth. President George Bush I said, "We are establishing a new world order." Where is it? Where is the New Deal? Or the Great Society? Or the 1,000 Years of Peace? I haven't seen it. Where is our love for our fellow human beings? Where are all the promises that didn't come true? Well, we can be assured that they were just promises to achieve the political aims of politicians, or the thugs, or the misguided. The generals of God promise things they cannot deliver. You know, reality has a way of surfacing. We go out to fight the dragon, but we come home bloody. Blunder after blunder has a high cost in lives lost and lives ruined, but we keep doing it. Well, after all, we've been doing it since the beginning of the human epic. I think spirituality comes at a high cost. And I think that cost is we have to relinquish our most primitive instincts. We have to recognize our oneness and our sameness with all members of the human family. We've got to start dialoguing with people we don't like. We must make our enemies our neighbor. Though it has not happened yet, I am a firm believer that the human family can rise above organized mass murder and eventually settle down to solve the real problems of the world. Thank you.